Now this week, NMPolitics.net and publisher Heath Hausman filed a lawsuit seeking records from the spaceport. The state of New Mexico helped build that spaceport, and officials tout it as an investment in economic development in southern New Mexico, certainly. But Mr. Hausman and other reporters have sought evidence to verify claims from spaceport officials. And Diane, as a former lawmaker, we're going to get into this idea of why you need so much secrecy in the space business. I'll hold that for a quick second. But as an ex-legislator, how does this hit you in your gut when you see an entity taking so many public dollars, not giving up a lot of information about their performance? How does that hit you as a?
Well, it's the issue that was mentioned most frequently was the fees being paid and the rent. And I'm going, there's nothing proprietary about that information.
Right.
That is simple day-to-day business. So yes, I think that should very clearly be public information.
Would you consider that a trade secret? What the people are paying?
No, I don't consider that a trade secret. What it might do is require the next guy who's paying a lot more to negotiate a little better
that happens.
About that on a contract. But that's legitimate.
Right.
But to say the public, I want to know. I was in the legislature when we funded the spaceport, and I want to know that we've got people. First of all, I want to know, do we really have these people? Are they really clients of the Space Center? I want to know that our investment is worthwhile. And I'm still waiting. If I had the $250,000, I'd sign right up and go on this space trip. But I'm still waiting for us to see anything of that really happening.
That's right.
But no, I think some of this is being, if it's proprietary information, then yes, we should not have access to it. But there are laws that protect that.
That's right. That's right.
But to just say, I can't know who's renting and what fees they're paying.
That's right.
I'm sorry, that's a little silly. And the other thing I noticed is, first of all, they failed to respond to Heath at first. So that in itself set the stage for things being a little bit wonky. And then charging him astronomical fees
illegally
for the copies.
That's right.
I'm going, wait a minute, I thought we addressed that issue some years ago too.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, so I, as a former legislator, I think the public has a right to know many of the things that were asked for.
Right.
Still protecting the proprietary information or trade secrets of the people who are renting.
Is that balance doable, what the Senator just described, and protecting both interests here? And are both interests being protected?
It feels to me like it should be doable.
Okay.
I understand that sometimes there are circumstances, let's say hypothetically, that the spaceport has contracts in which they agree we will not reveal any X, Y, or Z, and that has to be balanced against the public's right to find out that information. In some circumstances, a company, I'm not saying this is what the spaceport is doing, but in some circumstances the company will say, you're going to have to sue us for that.
That's right.
And it's not necessarily a malign thing that they're doing. It's just like, these are our contracts. I don't at this point know whether that's the circumstance here or whether there's something else going on. But I'm going to agree with Diane. I think that the overcharging, the treatment of Heath in particular, who does incredible reporting down in the southern part of the state, I got to say, in his own shop. So he's not supported by big bucks or anything like that. He is a real treasure down there. I think that they made a mistake in not trying to find a better solution, if a better solution is possible. I mean, it may be that it's not. That's a totally unhelpful answer. I apologize.
No, it's actually part of the whole situation.
It's complex.
That's right. It is complex. And Zach, when you think about it, again, I want to go to this secrets, trade secrets kind of a thing. It could be considered sort of a trade secret. There's only so many customers, so to speak, you can have at a spaceport.
Frame that argument.
And it's not like just renting at a regular business building or something. It's a whole different situation.
You could be having contracts set up between the U.S. government, Department of Defense, NASA, various entities that might be using technologies that are, of a national security importance. There's that argument, but I don't know what would stop somebody from getting the basics of what Senator Snyder was talking about. It's not too nitty and gritty to be asking for these kinds of things.
Right. No, we're talking about a lease agreement.
Right.
We're not talking about it.
You could say,
Come on.
you know, we need 5,000 square feet versus
Right.
we need 500. Is that even a possibility for a building? 500,000 square feet. Let's imagine it is. I have no idea. That might say something to your competitors about the technology that you've developed or where you are in your process. I don't know.
But we're not requiring Company A, who's doing the renting, we're not requiring them to list who their contracts are with. So that protects their information.
Gotcha.
So if their contracts are all
That's a key
with the-
distinction. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
some of those, some lease agreements could be very detailed. We just there's a lot of unknowns. So you could have a lease agreement that company XYZ is required to do at least 10 launches per year during the months of October, November, December. At which point that would be deemed as, I would view, as proprietary information.
Right.
I think the one part of the conversation that I'm more comfortable talking about, only because I've only seen Heath's coverage of this, is just how the spaceport is communicating what its mission is. And I don't think that they've done a really good job of that. They have a lot of great opportunity with the Branson and the Virgin Galactic flights that are going to be coming up to kind of share what their story is. This is one of those roadblocks in the way, but I'm wondering, where is the Foundation for Open Government? Why is Heath kind of taking this battle on all by himself?
Isn't he?
So that's a question. The other is just how quasi-governmental or just governmental entities treat the media.
Let me stop you there.
Okay.
I want to put a little meat on that bone right there.
You bet.
The Spaceport Authority blocked Heath at one point from their Twitter account.
Wow.
Stupid.
Right? I mean, like, why? Right to your point, how entities treat reporters. There's no winning with that. You can't win with that. I just...
It's
Right.
third grade rules.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that just makes absolutely no sense. Somebody woke up, had a bad day. I'm going to block them.
Right.
I don't like what they had to say. I'm blocking
I need to
them.
check and see if I'm blocked, by the way. I might be. I don't even know.
You have to follow them first.
The president himself has been accused of even blocking some people,
right.
and
That's
Twitter
right.
has gotten involved as well.
That's
but
right.
really blocking a reporter, all it does is it makes him angry. And I think that we have this. I've seen this conversation play out at the city level in the past administration of who is technically a reporter.
Right.
We've seen it at the gubernatorial level of who is technically a reporter, and I don't think you should really be arguing who a reporter is. If somebody asks a question, you answer the question. It doesn't matter if they have a blog or if they have a publication or if they have broadcast.
Thank you.
And
Exactly
it's not
right.
just that they targeted a reporter, that they targeted a reporter who was looking into what they
right.
were doing with taxpayer money.
That's
so
right.
Heath, keep at it.
That's right. He's reported fairly on them up to this point, too, by the way. Have to end that there. Up next, should all New Mexicans have the opportunity to buy into Medicaid?